Welcome into CyHawk Talk here on a Sunday, looking back at an Iowa loss and an Iowa State win on Saturday. Ben, what first reaction to you know questionable win, I guess, for Iowa State because there's some down negative stuff coming out of it. You're not moving up in the poll with the win. What's your initial reaction?
Ethan, this was Iowa State's first two-score win against an FBS opponent since last November. It's at home. Iowa State dominates. This should have been, a celebration, a celebratory mood as everybody was leaving Jack Trice Stadium, but there was a little bit of a cloud of an injury. A few different Cyclones got hurt in Saturday's game. One of them, Jontez Williams, left the game, the starting corner, with 3 minutes to go in a three-score game. Ethan, I think I was a little surprised that Williams was in the game at that point, and he leaves. He had been banged up with an ankle injury. Dominic Orange, big citrus. Everybody knows how important he is to the Cyclones. He exited the game, kind of flexing his left arm as he was walking off the field. It sounds like Iowa State avoided serious injury with those two. The same cannot be said for Kaijun Coleman Jennings, Iowa State's secondary player, who Matt Campbell said, we'll have to see. It sounds like that one's a little bit more serious. And then he did confirm that Jeremiah Cooper is lost for the season with a ligament injury in his knee. So a little bit of the shine from Iowa State's big win taken off by some of these injuries.
Interesting how they used the injury report a little bit there, the availability report not ruling Cooper out until game day, correct?
That's right. And, if I'm a head coach, maybe I'm trying to game these injury reports a little bit as well. I'm not accusing Matt Campbell of doing that. You know, um, if if he wants to wait until, you officially book a guy for surgery, to move him from questionable to out, that's fine with me. I'm not 100% sure if Cooper's injury occurred on Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday or when it happened. I don't necessarily blame a college football coach for trying to give my opponent the least amount of information possible.
A little bit of a mini game, if you will, there with the availability report. I've noticed when Iowa does theirs tend to be a little bit smaller. When I was typing it up for the Iowa Rutgers game, Rutgers lists a ton of guys on that and no, multiple questionable players. And it's almost like some teams take it to mean if this guy's nicked up at all, we're going to list him as questionable, kind of like you would in the NFL. Whereas, maybe Iowa's like, yeah, unless he's actually just a straight game time decision. We're going to either list them as questionable or they're not going to be on the injury report as the availability report at all. So it's kind of been interesting to see how that works. But let's shift away from maybe some of the negative stuff that happened in Ames yesterday and maybe look towards some positive things. Seems like a wide receiver front, there's been some progress or maybe not. Take me through what you saw from the wide receiver position for the Cyclones.
Stop me if you've heard this before, but have the Cyclones found their wide receiver one? I feel like I've said that, three different times with Dominic Overby's performance in Ireland and then Brett Eskelson later in the season with some big games. And now Chase Sowell had his breakout. The Eastern Carolina transfer had by far his best game as a Cyclone. He catches four passes for 146 yards, and it's actually the best game of his career in terms of passing yardage and what he was able to do. Nearly got in for a touchdown on Iowa State's first drive. He was dragged down at the one. Matt Campbell joked Iowa State's the worst team in the nation at getting tackled at the 1 yard line. But Rocco Becht was the beneficiary there. He had three rushing touchdowns and negative 10 yards on the day. So funny stat line for Rocco. But maybe Chase Sowell. Chase Sowell, the guy who had what Matt Campbell called the best 4 days of fall camp out of anybody. Then he got injured and he was only able to return to practice as Iowa State ramped up for Ireland. So finally, maybe after the bye week, he gets another week to get acclimated, to get integrated. Uh, Chase was Iowa State's leading receiver of targets. So I think he's becoming a little bit more of a focal piece of this offense and for Rocco Becht. So maybe Chase Sowell is your next wide receiver one for Iowa State.
Or maybe they're going Moneyball with it, and it's the wide receiver one they're building in the aggregate of all three of those guys, or all four of those guys, and a couple of tight ends as well. Do you think that this? I would say no because they're undefeated right now. Would be the answer to my own question. But do they need a number one wide receiver to get back to the Big 12 championship?
Don't take it from me, Ethan. I asked Brady Quinn that. A couple weeks ago when he was in town for Big New Kickoff, and I think I might have told you what he said. Look, Iowa State's going to need a wide receiver one. You can have a lot of success throwing to Gabe Burkle and throwing to Benjamin Bramer, the tight ends. And through the first month of the season, those guys were the leaders of the Iowa State passing attack. But it does feel like, eventually you're going to need a dynamic wide receiver to step up. And Sowell certainly has that ability. We saw him have the speed to get behind defenses on both of his big plays in the first half. One of them was a high point catch. So he has the physicality. And then the last thing we saw, I mean, if you're looking for another baseball reference, a three-tool wide receiver, Sowell also can run a slant and just run away from guys, as we saw him do in the second half. So Chase has the ability, I think, to be a more dynamic pass catcher than either Benjamin Bramer and Gabe Burkle, who are probably most effective, in the red zone, throwing them the ball there. So I think Iowa State will need someone like that to step up.
Gonna have to ask you for a trigger warning next time you talk about slants and running away from guys. A little too soon for us, us in the Iowa community that, talking about slants and running away from guys is as Iowa loses the game on basically that exact play yesterday. Uh, Wrap it up, put a bow on the Iowa State win. I want to ask about the kicker situation. Obviously, that was one of your big things going into the week. I obviously threw a couple of rocks at Iowa State's coaching decisions early in that game, going for the 2 point conversion, not letting him get comfortable as I accused them of. But what was your ultimate conclusion from Smith's debut as the starting kicker for Iowa State?
Ethan, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention Chase Smith, the North Scott Quad City Times legend who has been perfect at Iowa State. He's now 8 for 8 from extra points and 1 for 1. He hit I think, 32-yard field goal in the final seconds of Iowa State's win on Saturday. So he's the backup third stringer. You know the story by now. Hopefully you read the story on the Quad City Times. And it was really interesting to see Iowa State march down the field on its first drive, score a touchdown. And as you said, Ethan, Iowa State didn't put the faith in the freshman kicker to go out and make an extra point. I asked Matt Campbell why, and Campbell said he wanted to give Smith a chance to settle in the game, which maybe makes sense. Maybe that worked as Smith went 4 for 4 the rest of the way from those extra points and knocked in the field goal. So we never really got to see Smith's range truly tested in this one. Iowa State's offense was frankly so successful in the red zone that they didn't really have a need to kick a 40 or a 50 yarder. So I guess Matt Campbell gets to keep those cards close to the vest one more week, I presume, as Kyle Kenrardy and company are not probably going to be available for next week against Cincinnati, I would guess. So Chase Smith, man, he's been perfect.
Things
He's been
going well.
perfect.
Things going well for one Quad City area alumni in the special teams game, and maybe it's time for Iowa to move to another Quad Cities area alum in their kicking game, in Caden Burr, the backup kicker to Drew Stevens, who's missed a field goal in each of the last 3 games. We'll get into the Iowa Indiana discussion now, and I'll lead it off with my last thing that I'd written on the sheet, but we'll start. Well, we'll go move that one to the front here. Drew Stevens misses another field goal. Obviously, Iowa lost by 5. Who's to say if Indiana scores the touchdown I referenced earlier? Mendoza hits Elijah Surratt on a screen or a slant route, and then he just outruns everyone in the Iowa secondary for a touchdown. Would have been at that point if Drew Stevens has hit the 46-yarder that he missed, it would have been 20-16. So you can say, oh, it wouldn't have mattered that Drew Stevens missed, but who's to say what happens if Indiana is playing from behind at that point and it's 16-13? And like I said, third straight game that Drew Stevens has missed a field goal. This is kind of getting to the point where it's alarming. I'm sure people who were living and dying on Drew Stevens kicks 2 years ago when he struggled and they ultimately had to go to Marshall Meter for the game-winning kick against Nebraska, are kind of seeing some of the similarities as Drew Stevens struggled down the stretch in that season. For whatever reason, he's struggling again this season. 2 weeks ago when he missed his one field goal and a PAT against UMass, he said it's because I was trying to drive my kickoffs and I didn't switch my mentality. But he thought he had figured that out, and so I'm not sure what the issue is at this point. If it's there's been some people saying that the long snapper has been Bryant Worrell, the transfer from Boston College, is snapping it without holding the laces, and that's causing the holder to get it and have the laces be to Drew Stevens' kicking foot. which you don't want. So maybe that's the issue. I'll be keen to ask special teams coordinator LeVar Woods on Tuesday because we get the coordinators on the bye weeks. I'll be keen to ask him what he feels is wrong in the field goal operation because that's starting to be a big issue. And I said that after the UMass game in my 5 takeaways. I was like, hey, it doesn't matter right now, but this will matter eventually. And we saw it matter big time against Indiana on Saturday. So that's my number one thing coming out of that game that I think is, maybe a takeaway that you lost in the bitter disappointment of that defeat.
Special teams always a story, whether it's in Iowa City or in Ames. Another kind of fun stat that I heard floated around the press box. Maybe you can fact check me here. I haven't done it myself. Benjamin Bramer, Iowa State's tight end, threw a 45-yard pass on a trick play. And the word in the Jack Trice Stadium press box was that tied Mark Gronowski's long pass of the season. I'm not sure if you know that off the top of your head, but kind of a
Yeah,
funny thing to think about.
I'm pretty sure his long is 45 yards to Sam Phillips in that UMass game. It was the second play from scrimmage in that one. He had a 42-yarder against Rutgers, and I thought that one at the time was his longest, but I'm pretty sure it was that 45-yarder in the UMass game. So yeah, way to really rub that in there. That everything's going great for the Cyclones right now. This is supposed to be an unbiased podcast, Ben, and you just keep turning the knife here. All three
No,
opportunities you've had, you're just twisting
that's
it.
that's my best attempt at a transition to give you the floor to inform our viewers what's the latest on Mark Gronowski's injury. Maybe, Benjamin Bramer needs to get in the portal and go play some quarterback for Iowa.
Yeah, I don't think the Cyclones would like to see that. He does wear a quarterback number, right? He's 18, correct?
The best quarterback number ever.
Oh my
I
gosh.
would add. I would
He was
add
only with
the
the Peyton Manning was only with the Broncos for like a half second snapshot in time. Nobody remembers him as a Broncos quarterback. Give me a break with that garbage.
Peyton Manning remembers himself as a Broncos
All right, let's get
quarterback.
this back on.
He's in Denver.
Let's
Let's
get this
do it.
back on the
Let's do
rails.
it.
Let's get this back on the rails. I took it off track talking about you being a biased reporter, whatever. Yes, Mark Gronowski comes up lame after a 3-yard scramble on a third down in the fourth quarter. There's about 12 minutes left in the game. There is actually a really good AP photo of the exact play, and quite frankly, if my knee bent that way, I might not be on the show today. I might be in the hospital. So I really, you didn't see it live, particularly from the angle that play happened in to the press box in relation to the press box, but came up limping, needed help off immediately in the medical tent. And then because it was a third down play that immediately went into a field goal, we're not quite sure about his status. We didn't get an announcement over the PA. He was never listed as questionable to return. So that implies that he was capable of returning, and they just went coach's decision, Hank Brown, for the final 10 minutes of that game. Even when they went back to go out on offense on the next drive, he was out in the huddle with his helmet on. So it was like I tweeted out, I was like, oh, he's returned to the field. And then nope, it's Hank Brown. So I had to go back and say, well, no, I lied. I'm an idiot. And it's actually going to be Hank Brown. Uh, After the game, asked Coach Ferentz about Gronowski because he didn't end up returning at all, even as Hank Brown struggled. He threw a pick on, I believe, his first drive after getting into field goal range, and then the 3rd and 5 play that will go down in infamy when people think about that game where Hank Brown misses Kamari Moulton in the flat. Would have been probably a first down on a screen pass. You're really wishing, like, I think I saw 20 tweets yesterday. If Mark Gronowski doesn't get hurt, Iowa wins that game. And so you asked Coach Ferentz about it after the game, and he said, not really sure. I didn't feel like he could decelerate enough to go back into the game. I'm not really sure what a quarterback would need to be decelerating for. You can still throw a football without, accelerating and decelerating. But ultimately, they made the call to keep Mark out. I think that was precautionary. I think they felt confident enough in Hank Brown and what he was able to do. He did get all the 1 snaps in spring. So I think that was ultimately why they went there. Didn't really want to lose Gronowski for season potentially if he takes a bad shot to that knee again. And so I would say ultimately I came away from Coach Ferentz's postgame comments optimistic that he'll be back for Wisconsin. But it could be anything at this point, and I'm not 100% sure on what the timeline looks like for him.
Certainly interesting verbiage that I don't know if I've ever heard used to describe a football player with the word deceleration there. Now, I mean the thought from my perspective was, man, this is the most Iowa game to ever Iowa. You're following it along, and you think they have a real chance to go out there and, as you predicted, Ethan, go beat a team that was in the college football playoff last season, and it just didn't happen. Why is that?
Yeah, I mean, it was really a curious game to watch. My number one takeaway that the headline on it was changing by the series in the fourth quarter. I typed out what I had, and then it was like, okay, I got to change the headline because regardless of how it plays out, they'd played the Iowa upset formula to perfection, right? They'd controlled time of possession. They'd prevented Indiana from getting out to a really hot, like they got out to that hot start, scored a touchdown on the first drive off of an interception, and then after that, Iowa held them without a touchdown for the remainder of the first half, held them without a touchdown until that second to last drive of the fourth quarter. So if you're looking at it, it's like, man, Iowa played this perfectly to pull the upset and then just absolutely blew it at the end. And I asked this exact same question in my burning questions. It's like, how come Iowa can't win these ranked games? They're 0-11 in their last 11 games against ranked opponents, especially when we just saw proof of life for the Iowa formula. And it's like, well, the Iowa formula works. The Hawkeyes just aren't executing it correctly. You go look at some of the big upsets that you can think of in your mind, or even just the big wins. You think of 2021 Penn State, which I believe is their last ranked win. They dominated in the turnover game, and they were perfect in special teams. You go back to that huge Ohio State upset from 2017, won the turnover margin, perfect in special teams. What did they lose yesterday? Turnover margin. What did they lose against Iowa State? Turnover margin. What did they do poorly against Iowa State? Special teams. Caden Weegan had probably his worst game in the last 2 years in the return game against Iowa State. Yesterday, they had a blocked punt and they had a missed field goal, a critical missed field goal. So if it's like, oh man, the Iowa formula still works, but for whatever reason, this team this year just can't seem to get it right. Obviously, last year couldn't get it right either, but this year they feel a lot closer than they were in previous years, and I think that's probably why a loss like yesterday stings so bad, especially going into a bye week.
Shall we get into some grades?
We will right after this. Welcome back to CyHawk Talk. Professor Ben Hutchins is hot, chomping at the bit to get to his grades. I think he's being a little generous, and quite frankly, I give him an F for the grades he handed out today. But I'll go ahead and turn the floor over to Dr. Hutchins for his Iowa State grades from a win over Arizona.
In a 39-14 win for Iowa State, I only had one major gripe, and that was Iowa State's injury management. Go read my column on the Quad City Times. I wrote about it. I don't think Jontez Williams should have been out there with 3 minutes to go in a three-score game. ESPN's win percentage was at 99.9% when Williams got hurt. And to be clear, I'm not blaming Matt Campbell. 4, Jontez Williams getting rolled up on. It's unpredictable. That's football. Um, I just don't think he should have been out there, and that's something that's going to kind of dampen this incredible win for Iowa State. So that's my only gripe with the Cyclones on Saturday. I was impressed with Chase Smith, the freshman kicker, walk on. He goes out there and he makes all of his extra points, his only field goal of the day. Iowa State coach Matt Campbell went for 2 on the first touchdown to give Smith a chance to settle in, but I think Smith was already settled. He's now 8 for 8 this season and has done everything when he's been called on. So certainly a positive sign for Iowa State's kicking game. And last thing, I was impressed with Iowa State's home crowd. The whiteout looked great. I'm giving the fans an A plus. It's something maybe Iowa State people are now a little jaded toward. Iowa State's been selling out Jack Trice Stadium on the regular, and it's something that you really get reminded of when you talk to the Arizona reporters who looked around and said, "Man, is it like this every week? It looks awesome." And I think they were right. Iowa State looked great. They're now 10-0 in their last 10 games under the lights. Whether it's a whiteout or a blackout, Iowa State is tough to beat in the prime time when all those fans show up. So fans, I'm giving you an A plus for your performance on Saturday.
Iowa State's mom and dad going to take them out for ice cream, maybe get them a tutor for the injury management class they've been taking and doing poorly in. But for the most part, it's going to be a good report card, good day for Iowa State. Iowa's losing its phone, grounded for a couple of months based on the grades I'll be handing out today. The first one I'm going to hand out, though, is going to be the best one. It's defense. They're getting a B. There were some missed tackles, and obviously they didn't come up with the stop at the end of the game there. I'm not going to say when they needed to, because guess what they did the series before? They got an interception when they needed to and set up the offense for the game-winning drive, that the ill-fated drive there at the end where Stevens misses the field goal. I mentioned that third down play where Hank Brown misses Kamari Moulton, would have had a chance to get a first down, and then they probably run out the clock and kick a field goal as the game expires or time expires in the game. So the defense did what it needed to, and there's just maybe some stuff that they need to clean up. I arrived at the B grade as opposed to a B plus, A minus, B minus, because it felt like for 85% of the game, the defense was nails and did exactly what they needed to. And maybe that 15% is where they can say, man, we need to be better. And an 85% is a B, if I remember grades correctly from my days in high school and college. And then we'll go to the worst 2 grades. And going into this game, and I think I probably talked about it on Wednesday, Iowa wanted to get out to a fast start. They made getting out to a fast start the absolute emphasis going into this one. Indiana, they said, had gotten out to a strong start and taken control of games early, so they wanted to do basically the same thing to Indiana. What do they do on the first drive? Throw an interception and set up a Indiana touchdown. So you're going to get an F for a fast start. They did a great job responding to how poorly they did in that category, but in just terms of getting out to a fast start, trailing 7-0 after an interception and a 2-play touchdown drive from Indiana within the first 2 minutes is not going to get you anything better than an F. And then special teams, I'm handing out an F. Obviously, the return game didn't get to do much in this one. I spoke negatively about the punt and kick game last week. Gave him a C, though, because Caden Weegan made up for it in the return game. He didn't get a chance to operate. And so the kick and punt game are all we have to focus on. And they didn't hold up their end of the deal. It's going to be an F for me in that grade.
And that's going to do it for CyHawk Talk Sunday Rewind. Join us next week. We'll be back in the middle of the week to preview what's coming up and all the big things in Iowa sports.